The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of Normandy like a funeral shroud. It was July 28, 1944, and Sergeant Bob Bowers sat cramped inside the turret of his Sherman, his hand resting on the breech of a gun that should not exist. Outside, somewhere beyond the bocage, the grinding of heavy tracks announced what every Allied tanker had learned to fear: tigers prowling, hunting, killing with impunity. But Bowers's Sherman was different. Its turret stretched longer, its barrel reached farther, and painted on its flank in fresh white letters was a warning the British crews had learned to dread: Firefly. The Germans had learned to dread it too, but for entirely different reasons. They had standing orders, whispered from company to company, passed down from crews who had seen their tigers burn. Shoot the Firefly first, always first, before it shoots you. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. How did a single modification to the most common Allied tank become so feared that Wehrmacht doctrine demanded its immediate destruction? How did British tankers, given the weapon they'd begged for, discover that salvation came wrapped in a target painted on their backs? Close your eyes and listen to the sound of a 17-pounder shell leaving its barrel. That sound meant either victory or a death sentence, and the crews who fired it knew which one they'd receive long before the smoke cleared. The story begins not with triumph, but with slaughter. 1940, France collapsed under the weight of blitzkrieg, and British tankers learned a lesson written in fire. Their tanks were coffins on tracks. The 2-pounder guns, mounted in Matildas and cruisers, could barely scratch German armour. When shells struck Panzer III and IV hulls, they sparked and ricocheted like stones thrown against castle walls. British crews died screaming inside. Steel furnaces, their guns worthless, their armour inadequate, their tactical doctrine shattered. One tank commander wrote in his diary, recovered years later from a field near Arras, "We hit him 4 times, clear hits, centre mass. He turned his turret toward us, as if we'd merely annoyed him. Then he fired once, just once." The diary ended there. The British Army understood armour's brutal mathematics before the war even began. They pioneered tank warfare in the Great War, sending the first armoured giants crawling across the Western Front's mud and wire. But understanding and preparation proved to be entirely different things. British tank doctrine divided responsibilities with surgical precision. Cruiser tanks for exploitation and breakthrough, infantry tanks for support and defence, and a separate breed entirely for killing other tanks, except that separate breeds didn't exist when the war began. The 2-pounder, officially designated the QF 2-pounder Mark IX, seemed adequate in 1939. Its 40mm shells could penetrate the armour of any tank currently in service, and British planners assumed that armour thicknesses would remain relatively static, constrained by weight and mobility considerations. They assumed wrong. German engineers had other ideas, and those ideas arrived in 1943 wearing 88mm guns and armour thick enough to laugh at anything the British could throw at them. The Tiger I weighed 54 tons, mounted frontal armour 100mm thick, and carried a gun derived from the famous 88mm anti-aircraft cannon that had terrorised Allied tanks since North Africa. When Tigers appeared on the battlefield, British tank crews discovered that all their training, all their doctrine, all their courage meant precisely nothing against a machine that could kill them from 2,000 yards, while their own guns couldn't penetrate its hide at 200. Lieutenant John Gorman of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment encountered his first Tiger near Taborba in Tunisia, December 1942. His troop of 4 Crusaders engaged what they thought was a Panzer IV at 800 yards. All 4 tanks fired repeatedly, scoring multiple hits. The German tank, actually a Tiger, stopped moving. Gorman's crew cheered, thinking they'd scored a kill. Then the Tiger's turret rotated with mechanical precision, and the 88 spoke once. Gorman's tank exploded. The 2nd Crusader tried to retreat, but made it only 30 yards before another shell tore through its thin armour. The 3rd tank managed to lay smoke and escape. The 4th wasn't so fortunate. When the smoke cleared, 3 British tanks burned while the Tiger sat motionless, its crew apparently assessing damage. The British shells had scratched the paint, nothing more. The Tiger then drove away, seemingly bored with targets that couldn't fight back. Reports like this flooded back to the British War Office, each one more desperate than the last. Tank crews refused to engage Tigers unless absolutely necessary, knowing engagement meant death. Infantry called for tank support, and tankers arrived reluctantly, understanding they'd be asked to duel monsters with pistols. Morale collapsed, requests for transfer increased, and whispers spread through armoured regiments that High Command had sent them to war with obsolete equipment and doctrine written for a different kind of fighting. The British needed a bigger gun, desperately and immediately. The 6-pounder arrived in 1942, a significant improvement that could handle Panzer IIIs and IVs at reasonable ranges. But against Tigers and the new Panther tanks with their sloped frontal armour, the 6-pounder proved inadequate, merely annoying the German beasts rather than killing them. British tankers needed something that could punch through 80 to 100 millimeters of armour at combat ranges, something that gave them a fighting chance rather than a guaranteed funeral. The answer already existed, sitting in anti-tank batteries across Britain and North Africa. The 17-pounder, officially designated the Ordnance QF 17-pounder, this gun represented British artillery engineering at its finest. Developed between 1940 and 1942 specifically to counter heavily armoured German tanks, the 17-pounder fired a 76.2 mm projectile at extremely high velocity. Its armour-piercing, discarding sabot rounds could penetrate 140 mm of armour at 1,000 yards, and even standard armour-piercing rounds could punch through 130 mm at the same range. The gun was deadly, accurate, and powerful. It was also enormous, weighing over 3,000 pounds without its carriage, and nobody could figure out how to fit it inside a tank. British tank designers examined the 17-pounder with growing frustration. The gun was simply too large for existing British tank designs, its recoil too violent for turrets designed around smaller weapons, its breech too long for cramped fighting compartments already packed with ammunition, crew, and fire control equipment. Mounting it in a Cromwell proved impossible. The turret ring was too small, and enlarging it would require completely redesigning the hull. The Churchill's turret could theoretically accommodate the gun, but the Churchill was an infantry support tank, too slow for the mobile armoured warfare British doctrine envisioned. Meanwhile, thousands of American Sherman tanks arrived through Lend-Lease, reliable workhorses, mounting 75 mm guns, adequate for infantry support, but inadequate for tank versus tank combat against German heavy armour. The Shermans were good tanks, well-built, reliable, and easy to maintain, but their guns bounced shells off Tiger armour just like British 6-pounders did, and Sherman crews died just as quickly as Crusader crews when Tigers appeared. Someone at British Armoured Headquarters, history doesn't record exactly who, had a heretical idea: put the 17-pounder in a Sherman. The suggestion seemed absurd. The Sherman's turret wasn't designed for weapons that large, and American tanks used completely different mounting systems than British guns. The recoil would probably tear the turret off its ring, the breech would smash into the turret rear with each shot, and the whole concept violated every principle of weapons integration and turret design that British engineers held sacred. Desperate times demanded desperate measures. In late 1943, British engineers at the Department of Tank Design received orders to make it work, regardless of how difficult or unconventional the solution might be. Major George Witheridge led the team that would transform the Sherman from a competent medium tank into a Tiger killer, though the transformation would require ingenuity, compromise, and accepting that elegance mattered less than lethality. The engineering challenge was immense. The 17-pounder's recoil exceeded anything the Sherman's turret was designed to handle. Its breech was too long for the available space, and the weapon's mounting requirements didn't match existing Sherman turret geometry. Witheridge's team began modifying everything, cutting corners both literal and figurative, discarding conventional wisdom when conventional wisdom got in the way of making the gun fit. First, they rotated the gun sideways in the turret, mounting it at an angle so the massive breech could recoil past the gunner rather than crushing him against the turret wall. This created its own problems with gun laying and sighting, but at least it was physically possible. Second, they cut away portions of the turret rear and welded on a large armoured bustle to accommodate the breech's rearward travel during recoil. The modification looked crude, almost improvised, like someone had stuck an extra box onto the back of the turret with a welder and a prayer. Third, they removed the coaxial machine gun entirely, using that space for part of the 17-pounder's mounting. Fourth, they designed a completely new gun mantlet, much larger than the standard Sherman mantlet, to accommodate the 17-pounder's massive breech and recoil mechanism. The new mantlet extended well beyond the turret face, creating a distinctive bulge that made Fireflies immediately recognizable even at extreme ranges. The radio had to be moved from its usual position behind the turret basket to a position in the hull, requiring new wiring and creating communication challenges. Ammunition stowage changed completely, as 17-pounder rounds were much longer than 75mm shells. The crew had to reduce ammunition capacity from 90 rounds for the 75mm down to approximately 77 rounds for the 17-pounder, and even then, storage was cramped and difficult. The hull gunner's position was eliminated entirely, reducing crew from 5 to 4. The bow machine gun was removed and the position plated over, though the hull retained its distinctive hump where the assistant driver once sat. Every modification created new problems requiring new solutions. Each compromise forced another, and the entire design process felt less like engineering and more like forcing incompatible pieces together through sheer stubborn determination. By January 1944, the first prototype Fireflies completed testing at British ranges. The gun worked, the recoil didn't tear the turret apart, and accuracy proved acceptable despite the awkward mounting angle. But crews who climbed inside discovered immediately that the Firefly was cramped, uncomfortable, and difficult to operate compared to standard Shermans. The gunner worked in a space so tight he could barely move, surrounded by recoil mechanisms that threatened to crush him if he made a mistake during combat. The loader struggled with long, heavy 17-pounder rounds in a turret that offered minimal space for the complex ballet of loading, aiming, and firing. Yet, when test rounds struck armor plate targets at range, they punched through steel that no other Allied tank gun could penetrate. At 1,000 yards, 17-pounder armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds carved through test plates, simulating Tiger frontal armor. The Firefly could kill Tigers, kill Panthers, kill anything the Wehrmacht could field, and suddenly all the compromises, all the discomfort, all the crude modifications seemed entirely acceptable. Production began immediately, with British conversion centres taking standard Sherman tanks from American production lines and transforming them into Fireflies. The work was labour-intensive and time-consuming, requiring skilled fitters and welders to modify each turret individually. British factories could convert only a limited number of tanks each month, which meant Fireflies would always be rare, precious, and carefully distributed throughout British armoured regiments. British armour doctrine specified that each tank troop of 4 Shermans would include 1 Firefly, giving every small unit the ability to engage German heavy armour while maintaining numerical strength through standard Shermans. The mathematics were straightforward. 1 Firefly per troop meant 1 long-range killer, backed by 3 standard Shermans for general-purpose combat, infantry support, and drawing enemy fire, while the Firefly manoeuvred for killing shots. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, approximately 100 Fireflies had arrived in Normandy with British and Canadian armoured units. Crews trained frantically with their new weapons, learning the Firefly's peculiarities and understanding that they now drove the only Allied tank that could reliably kill Tigers and Panthers. They also understood that German crews would recognize Fireflies instantly through their distinctive long barrels and enlarged mantlets, making them priority targets in any engagement. The hedgerows of Normandy became proving grounds where doctrine collided with reality. British armoured regiments advanced through bocage country, narrow lanes hemmed by ancient earthworks, topped with dense vegetation that limited visibility to mere yards. Panthers lurked in ambush, their long 75mm guns covering road junctions from concealed positions. Tigers prowled lanes and fields, hunting for Sherman silhouettes to add to their kill counts. Firefly crews discovered quickly that their deadly gun came with a curse painted on their hulls. German tank commanders, veterans who'd learned to recognize Allied tank types instantly through their optics, spotted Firefly barrels and mantlets from hundreds of yards away. Standing German tactical doctrine, confirmed through post-war interrogations and captured documents, explicitly instructed tank commanders to engage Fireflies first, before standard Shermans, even if other targets appeared more threatening or closer. The logic was brutally simple. Standard Shermans couldn't penetrate German heavy armor at combat ranges, making them annoyances rather than threats. Fireflies could and would kill tigers and panthers if given the chance, making them existential dangers that required immediate elimination. German tank commanders who survived engagements with British armor consistently reported the same tactical sequence. Identify Fireflies by their long barrels, range them immediately, fire first at the Firefly regardless of other tactical considerations, then handle the remaining standard Shermans at leisure. Trooper Joe Eakins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry learned this lesson during heavy fighting south of Cayenne in August 1944. His Firefly, commanded by Sergeant Gordon, engaged German armor near the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramsnil on August 8 during Operation Totalize. The battle began at dawn, British and Canadian armor advancing through morning mist toward German positions dug into hedgerows and farm buildings. Eakins' Firefly moved carefully forward, Gordon scanning constantly for enemy tanks while Eakins waited at his gunner's position, hand on the traverse control. Suddenly, Gordon shouted contact. German armor, Panthers. 3 of them in hull-down positions, 500 yards distant. Eakins traversed right, found the first Panther in his sight, centered the crosshairs on the turret, and waited for Gordon's fire command. Before Gordon could give the order, a massive explosion shook the ground 30 yards to their left. A Panther's 75mm shell had struck a standard Sherman in their troop, punching completely through its hull and igniting ammunition. Flames erupted from every hatch as the crew bailed out, some on fire, some already dead. Eakins realized with cold certainty that the Panther commander had deliberately bypassed his Firefly initially to kill the closer Sherman first, a tactical mistake the German would not survive to repeat. Gordon screamed fire and Eakins squeezed the trigger. The Firefly lurched backward from recoil, the turret filled with cordite smoke, and through his sight, Eakins watched the 17-pounder round strike the Panther's turret side. The German tank exploded, its turret lifting completely off the hull ring before crashing back down at an angle. Ammunition cooked off inside, flames shooting from hatches and vision ports. The second Panther fired at Eakins' Firefly immediately, recognizing the threat. The shell missed by mere feet, shrieking past the turret and striking earth behind their position. Eakins traversed desperately, found the second Panther already moving to a better firing position, led the target slightly, and fired again. Another hit, this one striking the Panther's front hull below the gun mantlet where armor was slightly thinner. The round penetrated, and the Panther stopped moving immediately, smoke pouring from its hatches. The third Panther had seen enough. Its commander reversed rapidly, backing into cover behind a hedgerow before Eakins could get a third shot. Gordon ordered their driver to move immediately, knowing that staying in one position after killing 2 Panthers meant attracting fire from every German gun within range. They reversed into a sunken road, waited 5 minutes, then moved to a different position 200 yards north. The engagement lasted perhaps 3 minutes from first contact to disengagement. 2 Panthers destroyed, 1 Sherman lost from Eakins' troop, and Eakins' hands shaking so badly he could barely hold a cigarette when Gordon passed one forward. But they'd proven the Firefly's value. British armor finally had a weapon that could kill German heavy tanks at combat ranges under realistic battlefield conditions. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Similar engagements played out across Normandy throughout June, July, and August of 1944. Fireflies stalked Panthers in Bocage country, killed tigers at road junctions, and forced German armor commanders to completely revise their tactical approaches. No longer could tigers advance confidently, knowing British tanks couldn't hurt them. Now, Somewhere in every British tank formation lurked one or more Fireflies, invisible until they fired, capable of killing any German tank with a single well-placed shot. German tactical doctrine adapted rapidly. Wehrmacht training bulletins from mid-1944, captured after the war, explicitly described Firefly recognition features and mandated their immediate engagement. One document, recovered from a destroyed Panther near Falaise, included crude sketches showing the Firefly's distinctive elongated barrel and enlarged mantlet, with handwritten notes in the margin, "Diese zuerst töten," kill these first. British Firefly crews understood their tactical situation with grim clarity. They drove tanks that could finally kill German heavy armour, but they also drove targets that every German gunner had orders to destroy immediately. Survival required constant movement, careful positioning, and understanding that remaining stationary for more than a few minutes after revealing your position meant inviting destruction. Firefly commanders developed elaborate camouflage schemes to disguise their tanks' distinctive features. They welded false muzzle brakes onto standard Sherman barrels, making them appear longer from a distance. They painted the Firefly's distinctive bustle in patterns that broke up its silhouette. Some crews even attached lengths of pipe to standard Sherman barrels, creating dummy long guns that might draw fire away from actual Fireflies. The most common and simplest disguise involved painting the last few feet of the 17-pounder's barrel in light colours or wrapping it in camouflage netting, making it harder to judge the gun's true length from a distance. In some units, crews applied thick coats of mud and foliage to their barrels, hoping German observers might mistake them for standard Shermans until the moment they fired. But these measures could only delay recognition, not prevent it. The moment a Firefly fired, its position was revealed by muzzle flash and the distinctive report of the 17-pounder, noticeably different from the 75mm bark. German observers would note the position, identify it as a Firefly, and prioritize it for immediate counterfire. Firefly crews learned to fire once, maybe twice, then move immediately, relocating to different positions before German gunners could range them accurately. Trooper Jack Wardrop, who served as a Firefly loader with the Scots Guards, described the constant psychological pressure in his post-war memoir. "You knew, every time, you rolled forward, that you'd painted a target on your chest. Jerry wanted you dead first, before anything else. You'd see a tiger, you'd kill it if you were lucky and quick, and then you'd run like hell because every German gun in the sector would be looking for you. It wasn't fighting, really. It was murder and flight, over and over, until your luck ran out or the war ended." The psychological burden fell heaviest on Firefly gunners, men like Ekins, who understood that their accuracy often determined whether their crew lived or died. Standard Sherman gunners could miss and probably survive to get another shot. Firefly gunners who missed often didn't get second chances, because their first shot announced their position to every German tank within visual range. The pressure to make that first shot count, to kill with the first round, created stress that wore men down over weeks of continuous combat. Despite these challenges, Fireflies compiled remarkable kill records throughout the Normandy campaign. On August 8, 1944, during Operation Totalize, Trooper Ekins achieved what many historians consider the Firefly's most remarkable single engagement. His tank, a Sherman Firefly IK designated as Velikie Luki and commanded by Sergeant Gordon, encountered elements of the 1st SS Panzer Corps near Saint-Aignan de Cramesnil. The morning was grey and cold, mist hanging in valleys between low hills. British and Canadian armour advanced in columns toward German positions, hoping to break through and reach Falaise. Ekins's Firefly moved with its troop, 4 tanks in loose formation, when Gordon spotted movement ahead through his commander's periscope. Panthers, multiple contacts, hull-down positions on a ridge roughly 1,000 yards distant. Gordon counted quickly. 1, 2, 3 Panthers visible, probably more concealed behind them. The German tanks hadn't moved yet, their commanders apparently still unaware of British armour approaching through the mist. Gordon made a snap decision: engage immediately before the Panthers spotted them and brought their superior numbers to bear. Ekins traversed onto the first target, a Panther in a hull-down position showing only its turret above the ridgeline. The range was long, over 900 yards, but the Firefly's 17-pounder was built for exactly this kind of engagement. Ekins centered his sight reticle on the visible turret, adjusted slightly for range and wind, and waited for Gordon's command. Fire! The 17-pounder roared, the Firefly rocked backward from recoil, and Ekins watched through his sight as the armor-piercing round struck the Panther's turret front. The German tank exploded spectacularly, ammunition cooking off in a fountain of flame that sent the turret spinning through the air. Ekins didn't pause to admire his shot. He traversed immediately left, seeking the second target while their loader, Corporal Horn, rammed another round into the breach. The second Panther had spotted them now, its turret rotating to bring its 75mm gun to bear. It was a race. Would Ekins get his shot off first, or would the Panther kill them before they could fire again? Ekins found the target in his sight, a Panther in a similar hull-down position, 200 yards left of the first kill. He fired without waiting for Gordon's command, instinct and training taking over. Another hit, this one striking the Panther's gun mantlet and penetrating into the turret. The German tank stopped moving immediately, smoke pouring from its hatches. 2 kills in less than a minute, at ranges where most Allied tank guns would have been ineffective. But Ekins wasn't done yet. A third Panther appeared, moving rapidly from behind cover to find a firing position. This one was closer, perhaps 700 yards, and its commander had clearly seen what happened to his squadron mates. The Panther moved fast, trying to get a shot while remaining a difficult target. Ekins, he traversed frantically, trying to lead the moving tank while Horn loaded another round with frantic speed. The Panther stopped suddenly, its commander choosing a firing position behind a destroyed building that offered partial concealment. Ekins had perhaps 3 seconds before the German gunner ranged them and fired. He centered the crosshairs on the Panther's visible hull, adjusted for the slight downward angle, and fired his third shot in 90 seconds. The round struck low, hitting the Panther's lower hull near the suspension. For a moment, Ekins thought he'd missed anything vital, that the Panther would return fire and kill them all. Then the German tank lurched, flames erupted from its engine deck, and the crew began bailing out as fire spread through the vehicle. 3 Panthers, destroyed in rapid succession, at ranges and speeds that seemed impossible even to the crews witnessing the engagement. But the celebration was brief and muted. Gordon immediately ordered their driver to reverse and relocate, knowing that every German gun for miles around would now be seeking the Firefly that had just killed 3 Panthers. They moved to a position 500 yards south, hull down behind an earthwork, and waited. Minutes later, German artillery began impacting their previous position, shells screaming in to obliterate the spot where they'd made their stand. Post-war research, including detailed analysis by historians examining German records and veteran accounts, suggests that one of the Panthers Ekins destroyed that day may have been commanded by Michael Wittmann, Germany's most famous tank ace with 138 confirmed kills. Wittmann died on August 8 near St. Aignan de Cramsneel when his Tiger was destroyed, though some historians argue he may have been killed by rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft rather than tank fire. The debate continues among scholars, but the tactical reality remains undisputed. Fireflies could and did kill German heavy tanks regularly throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond, fundamentally changing the balance of armoured combat. British tankers finally had a weapon that gave them a fighting chance, though that chance came wrapped in danger that made Firefly crews some of the most targeted tankers in the European theatre. The 17-pounder's effectiveness extended beyond simple armour penetration. German tank crews who encountered Fireflies consistently reported the psychological impact of facing a gun that could kill their Panthers and Tigers reliably at combat ranges. For the first time since 1943, German armour didn't enjoy overwhelming technical superiority. They had to manoeuvre carefully, use terrain intelligently, and avoid presenting their tanks' vulnerable points to British guns. This psychological reversal proved almost as valuable as the Firefly's kinetic effects. Tiger commanders who'd grown accustomed to advancing boldly, knowing British tanks couldn't hurt them, now had to fight cautiously, constantly scanning for the distinctive Firefly silhouette. Panthers that had dominated British armour through superior guns and armour now faced opponents who could kill them at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The German advantage in tank versus tank combat hadn't disappeared, but it had narrowed considerably. British armoured doctrine evolved to maximise Firefly effectiveness while minimising their exposure. Troop commanders learned to position Fireflies in overwatch positions, providing long-range fire support while standard Shermans advanced and drew enemy attention. The Firefly would remain concealed until German armour revealed itself engaging the standard Shermans, then strike from an unexpected angle with devastating effect. This tactic, refined through hard experience in Normandy's bocage, proved remarkably effective. German tank commanders would spot a troop of 4 Shermans, identify what they thought were all standard 75mm variants, and engage confidently. The Firefly, positioned carefully to remain unobserved, would wait until the German tank committed to the engagement, then kill it with a flanking shot before the enemy realized their mistake. Lieutenant William Chapman of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry described this tactic in action near Villers-Bocage in June 1944. "We'd send 3 Shermans forward, making noise, drawing attention, while the Firefly hung back 200 yards in a hull-down position. Jerry would spot the 3 standards and think he had easy targets. His Tiger would engage, feeling confident, and while he was focused on the 3 standards, our Firefly would put a 17-pounder round through his flank. It worked brilliantly, until Jerry caught on and started looking for the 4th tank that wasn't advancing with the others." German tactical adaptation forced constant British counter-adaptation. When Wehrmacht tank commanders learned to look for the hanging back Firefly, British troop leaders started advancing all 4 tanks together, disguising the Firefly until the last possible moment. When Germans learned to recognize Firefly silhouettes at distance, British crews improvised elaborate camouflage. The tactical dance between German recognition and British deception continued throughout the campaign, each side learning and adapting, seeking any advantage in combat where seconds determined survival. Firefly maintenance presented unique challenges that British workshops had to address through experience and improvisation. The 17-pounder's violent recoil stressed the Sherman's turret ring and mounting systems beyond their original design specifications. After repeated firing, mounting bolts would loosen, recoil mechanisms would leak hydraulic fluid, and the entire gun mounting assembly required careful inspection and adjustment. British armoured workshops developed specialised maintenance procedures for Fireflies, recognising that these precious few tanks required priority attention. Fitters learned to check specific stress points after every major engagement, tightening bolts, adjusting recoil mechanisms, and replacing worn components before they failed catastrophically. The work was time-consuming and required skilled technicians, but Fireflies were too valuable to lose through mechanical failure. Ammunition supply created another persistent challenge. 17-pounder rounds were longer, heavier, and more complex than 75mm shells, requiring separate supply chains and specialised handling. British logistics units had to maintain stocks of both types, ensure proper distribution to units with Fireflies, and prevent mix-ups that could leave Fireflies without ammunition during critical engagements. The armour-piercing discarding sabot rounds, designated APDS, proved particularly troublesome. These specialised projectiles consisted of a dense tungsten carbide penetrator core surrounded by a lightweight aluminum sabot that fell away after leaving the barrel. The design achieved extremely high velocity and excellent armour penetration, but APDS rounds were expensive, difficult to manufacture, and perpetually in short supply. British armoured units received strict instructions regarding APDS usage: save them for heavy armour targets at long range, use standard armour-piercing rounds for everything else. Firefly commanders had to make split-second decisions about which ammunition type to use, balancing the need to conserve scarce APDS against the need to kill German tanks before they killed you. Wrong decisions meant wasted ammunition or missed kills. Right decisions meant survival and victory. Training new Firefly crews presented challenges that British armoured schools addressed with varying success. The guns' cramped mounting and awkward loading procedures required practice to master, but training time and ammunition were both limited resources. Crews often arrived at their units with minimal Firefly experience, learning the tank's peculiarities under combat conditions rather than safe training ranges. Veteran Firefly crews developed informal knowledge bases, passing tactical lessons and maintenance tips to replacement crews who arrived to fill positions left vacant by casualties. This informal training network proved invaluable, supplementing official doctrine with practical wisdom earned through hard experience. New gunners learned where to aim on specific German tank types to maximize killing probability. New loaders learned efficient movements in the cramped turret that minimized loading time. New commanders learned when to fire and when to remain concealed, patience being as valuable as aggression. The Firefly's effectiveness metrics, compiled from British after-action reports and German loss records, demonstrate its impact clearly. In Normandy, Fireflies represented approximately 20% of British Sherman tanks, but accounted for roughly 50% of German armour kills. The ratio improved further for heavy armour specifically. Fireflies killed approximately 70% of all Tigers and Panthers destroyed by British tank fire during the campaign. These statistics came at terrible cost. Firefly casualty rates exceeded those of standard Shermans by significant margins. British armoured unit records show that Firefly crews suffered approximately 30% higher casualties than standard Sherman crews in the same units, reflecting the priority targeting German doctrine demanded. Firefly commanders and gunners showed even higher casualty rates, as they occupied positions most exposed to German fire during engagements. Yet, despite the danger, Firefly positions remained coveted among British tank crews. Men volunteered for Firefly duty, understanding the risks but preferring a tank that could fight effectively over one that merely survived through being ignored by German gunners focused on more dangerous targets. The psychology was straightforward. Better to die in a tank that could kill German armour than to survive helplessly in one that couldn't. As Allied armies broke out from Normandy in August 1944 and raced across France, Fireflies proved their value repeatedly in mobile warfare. German armour, already depleted by losses in Normandy, couldn't effectively contest Allied advances when Fireflies could kill Panthers and Tigers at ranges where German tanks expected immunity. The psychological impact on Wehrmacht morale became increasingly apparent through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. One German tank commander, captured near Falaise, told his British interrogators, "We feared the Firefly more than any other Allied tank. You could hear the difference when it fired, see the longer barrel, and you knew if it hit you, you were dead. Our orders were always the same. Kill the Firefly first, no matter what else you see. But finding it before it found you, that was the problem. Those British bastards got very good at hiding them." The liberation of France and advance into Belgium saw Fireflies continue their deadly work. In September, during Operation Market Garden, British armour pushing toward Arnhem encountered German resistance, including Tiger and Panther tanks, rushed forward to block the advance. Fireflies of the Guards Armoured Division and other units fought repeated engagements along narrow Dutch roads where manoeuvre was limited and positioning determined victory. Corporal Patrick Hennessy, a Firefly gunner with the Irish Guards, described one engagement near Eindhoven. "We came round a bend, and there's a Panther, 200 yards away, blocking the road. No room to manoeuvre, no time to think. I fired instinctively, didn't even wait for the command. Hit him square in the front hull, round went straight through. He brewed up immediately, flames everywhere. Then we had to push past him, our Sherman actually brushing against his burning hull as we squeezed by. I could feel the heat through the armour, could hear their ammunition cooking off inside. War's not glorious. It's murder and survival, nothing more." By early 1945, as Allied armies pushed into Germany itself, Fireflies had become the most respected Allied tank among Wehrmacht armoured forces. German tactical manuals from the war's final months devoted entire sections to Firefly recognition and engagement procedures, evidence of the tank's impact on German tactical thinking. The standing order remained unchanged. Engage Fireflies first, accept risk to eliminate them, because leaving Fireflies operational meant accepting your own death when they fired. The final months of the war saw Firefly production continue. British conversion facilities working steadily to replace combat losses and maintain unit strength. By VE Day in May 1945, approximately 2,000 Fireflies had been produced, serving with British and Canadian armoured units throughout northwest Europe. Some Fireflies continued service after the war, seeing combat in Korea with British forces before finally being replaced by more modern designs. The Firefly's legacy extended beyond its impressive kill record. It demonstrated that sometimes adequate platforms could be made lethal through creative weapons integration, that compromises in ergonomics and elegance were acceptable when the alternative was tactical impotence. British engineers had taken an American tank and a British gun, forced them together despite all the reasons they shouldn't work, and created a weapon that fundamentally changed armoured combat in northwest Europe. For German tank crews, the Firefly represented the end of their unchallenged dominance. For British tankers, it represented salvation, a weapon that finally let them fight rather than simply die. And for the crews who manned these awkward, cramped, dangerous machines, it represented both hope and a death sentence, written in the standing German order that echoed across every battlefield where Fireflies appeared: shoot them first, always first, before they shoot you. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.